Hi class, I'm trying something different this time and going to use multiple cameras. As you can see, I'm set up in my own little living room here, prepared to look at some plans. And today we're going to talk about construction permits and the plans check process. So we've talked already about permits, and you know that there's two kinds of permits: operational and construction. Operational permits is a way for us to control hazardous processes or hazardous places. So permits like a fair, if you want to have a fair, if you want to have a haunted house, if you want to do filming other than in a already permitted film studio. If you want to go on location, you have to get a permit. So the list is very long, and we looked at that in the previous lecture. The other kind of permits is construction permits. And when you're going to do a construction permit, you have to turn in plans. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's go back a little bit more, though, and remember kind of the who, what, where, why with permits. I mentioned that with permits, why do we require them? This is a way, first of all, it's required by the code. In the code, it talks about what kinds of processes and what kinds of things require a permit. Well, why do we do it? Well, it's a way to control hazardous processes, hazardous occupancies, and things of that nature. So, well, what if we didn't do it? And what if people don't get a permit when they're supposed to? Well, this happens quite often. I'll give you just a couple of quick examples here. Went on a brush fire many years ago in a place called Placerita Canyon out in Valencia area. And we got there, and this fire, the wind was blowing this day, and so the fire was raging uphill, up canyon with wind aided, and we ended up kind of at the anchor point and fought fire there at the anchor point and tried to get at least a good start on the two flanks while other engines went to the head of the fire. And I remember that my captain, the fire started at a home, right outside of a home. So as we started to make our headway, and the fire where we were was mostly under control, it was ripping down up the canyon. But he went and he talked to the owner of this property and started asking questions, doing an initial investigation to cause. And it turned out that she had a man doing a bunch of welding on her iron wrought fence. And first question, did he get a permit? Did he have to have a permit? I didn't know he had to have a permit. Well, he should have known he had to have a permit. So whenever you do hot work, you have to have a permit. So, especially when it's in a new and different place. So that welder was actually held liable for that fire, because if he'd had a permit, well, part of the permit requires that he has a hose next to him while he's fighting the fire, while he's doing his work, so as to, if any sparks get into the brush or whatever, he could quickly put it out and there wouldn't have been any problem. But he didn't have an extinguisher, a garden hose, a bucket, anything. So, big problem. So he was held liable. A couple examples from the film industry. Big to-do, quite some time ago, about 5 years ago, in the Atlanta, Georgia area, if I remember correctly. And if I get some of the facts here wrong, I'm just telling a story here, but this is a true event, and I might not have all the facts exactly correctly. But they wanted to film on a train track. They were going to put a bed on this train track and film this person in bed on the train track. I don't know what the storyline was. It kind of seems silly, but that's what was going to happen. So they went to the permitting agency for film in that area, and they were told, well, the only way we can give you a permit is if you get permission from the railroad company. So they went to the railroad company and looked into that, and the railroad company said, you know what, that's a line we don't use a lot, but we do use it, and no, you cannot film on this rail line. So they went back to the permit company and said, what do we do? They said, no, you can't do it. So they said, oh, okay. And they went and they did it anyways. So they put this bed on the railroad tracks. They put the cameras on the railroad tracks. And they put some people watching, this way and that way. And they thought, if a train comes, we'll be fine. We'll just pull everything and run. Well, a train came. And not the cameraman, but the backup to the cameraman, I believe they're called the focus person or something like that. The person that runs the focus was also in charge of the camera. Cameraman ran, the actors ran, but this woman who was the focus person, she was trying to save the camera. These cameras are extremely expensive. She was trying to save the camera, and she got hit by the train and it killed her. These people got sent to jail. They were held liable, sued. It was an enormous big deal. One last little story. FX guy was working for a film, and they wanted to have a grenade launcher. Well, we never use a real, actually a rocket launcher. I'm sorry, not a grenade launcher, a rocket launcher. And they never actually use a real rocket launcher in, shows like Black Hawk Down or whatever. It's not a real RPG. It's simulated. And this guy said, hey, I handmade, custom-made a rocket launcher, and we can use this thing, and it'll be the real deal. It'll be really realistic. And they decided to do it, but they knew they would never be able to get a permit. So they did it anyways. And before they actually filmed it, they decided to test it. And they went to this obscure area, and the FX guy, fired the rocket launcher, and it blew up in his hands and killed him. This is why we do permits. We want to make sure that hazardous processes and or hazardous places are all done correctly. And guess what? You may not realize it, but every building is a hazardous place. We want to make sure, because buildings are doing what? They're defying gravity. So how are we going to make sure that that building stands when the snows come? When the Santa Anas come and they're blowing 65 to 75 miles per hour? How do we make sure that buildings are safe for those occupants? Well, we have a permit that's required through the construction plans process, and they have to turn in plans. And where does it begin? Well, you know what? Before I say that. So the why, control hazards and processes. We enforce the code. We communicate the requirements to those people who are given the permit. And it gives full disclosure not only to the community, but especially to the fire department of what kind of buildings, what kind of hazards are going on in their districts. So all of this happens with plan check, and as I started to say, it starts with the building official. The plans get turned into the building official, and all the sets of plans are collected there. And they're stamped. I'm going to show you some stamps here in a second. And they're stamped as of the day they were turned in, and then they have to bring in a certain amount of copies, and some copies are going to go to zoning, some copies are going to go to fire. So fire only gets certain parts of the plans. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit today. So what part does the fire department or fire prevention play in this plans process? Well, if it has any kind of fire protection systems, we do all the plans checking on that. Even though the building official is going to look at exiting, the fire official is also going to look at exiting. They'll work together on that. And then lastly, if there's any kind of hazmat or other hazardous processes that also require permits, then they'll be a part of that. If it's a car mechanic's place and they're going to do welding, we've got to do the permits on the welding for the hot work. If there's going to be hazardous materials there, hazardous chemicals, all of those kind of things, we're going to be involved in that process, and there'll be plans related to that and additional permits, okay? That is one of the other things that we do with a permit is we're checking to see if anybody in any other agency has to be involved. So we work in coordination with the building official, with the health department, with all of the zoning, all of these different agencies. Okay, so let's look at some plans. We're going to change cameras here. Now, I have to apologize to you because I'm going to have this one camera and I'm going to move it around here and there. So every once in a while, you'll probably get all dizzy. But let me switch now to the other camera. And as you can see here, the goal with the construction plans process is they want to get this stamp right here. See what it says there? Can you read that? It says approved. And until they get that approval with, not only does it say approved, but it's got a signature and a date. See that? A signature and a date. So what this does is it says you can move forward now. Now, until they get the total approval by the building official, they can't break ground. They can't do one single thing until they get approval. Now, this approval, they're clarifying here. This is for the overhead system, and these are revised plans. Initial approval was November 29, 2010. But in March of 2011, they had some changes that they had to make. So this is the goal. This is the end game, getting approved. Once they're approved, then they can start construction. Now, why is there a date on it? Well, that's really important because not only does it say as of this day you can start, but it also, the time clock. Approval is not forever. If you procrastinate past a certain amount of time, you got to go through the plans process again because laws change. So if you got approved plans but you did not start to build, you can actually, these plans can expire. Now, this is really hard to read here, but this verbiage here tells us that if the plans checker made a mistake, or if there was any kind of an error, that they're held, the law supersedes the approval. Okay? So the code has to be followed even if an approval was given in error. Okay, so that's the end game. Well, where do we start? Well, first of all, we start with, well, what is this building? Okay, we need to know what's the construction type and the occupancy type. Now, this is plans for Henry Mayo Newhall Memorial Hospital, which is an I-2, but this is for their parking structure. So that's an S2. And this is just their utility plan. And again, I want to move you and you're going to see this kind of sideways, I'm sorry. But see here, well, I think I can just kind of hold it here. See where it says FP1? That FP1 is telling us this is just the fire plans, okay? And notice that it says sheet 1 of 7, doesn't say page. When we're dealing with plans, they call them sheets, not pages. Now, and so you want to use the right terminology. If you've taken a construction class or any other classes in fire tech and fire prevention courses, your vocabulary is very important. Use the right terminology is the best way to say it. Now notice also, I'm going to kind of put this here. We've got the civil engineer's stamp here. That tells us who was the civil engineer on it. And I also want to point out that we need to know right away, well, what's the scale for these plans? So the scale on this one is 1 inch equals 20 feet. Let me go to these other plans over here, a little harder to see because it's very small. Let's see, there it is. Okay. 3/32 equals 1 inch. Well, now you're going, oh, crud, I got to do all of this math. Well, actually, not really, because plans checkers use engineer scales. And if you can see here, I've got two different types of engineer scales, and they're, triangular. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different scales right here on this architect's scale. So you would just look it up, and let's see, I think I got one here that's 3/32. Maybe it's on this one. Now this one is centimeters. Well, I know I got it here somewhere because I saw it. 3/16, 3/32 there. So see, this one says 3/32. So each of these equal 1 foot. Okay, so if you're using this scale in this direction, this would be right here 100 feet. So, and then the other one was 1 inch equals 20 feet. So it's a 1:20 scale. So that's what they use. They use these architect scales. Then, now it's important that the plans include all the boilerplates. Well, what's a boilerplate? This is a boilerplate here, and they'll be told, okay, you need to include all of these notes. So there'll be multiple boilerplates on the plans, and this is just saying these are the requirements that LA County is putting on them, verbatim notes per this regulation, number 7, that they have to have all of this on there. And basically it's saying the standards by which this has to be built. So the boilerplates have to be done. Now sometimes also there are other details that will be on the plans, and so here's some specific details of what the FDC is supposed to look like, a front view and a side view, and then again, boilerplate notes. I'm going to move this back so you can see that a little better. So boilerplate notes. No, whenever there's going to be water, plumbing for fire, they're going to be required to have thrust blocks. This is what holds the plumbing together. And if you're in my fire protection systems class, we'll talk about that when we get to water. But they got to make sure that everything is built according to these standards. So another thing that's very important in relation to scale and details is where's north. So the compass rose. On a map we call it the compass rose. But what's your north? And which way are we facing when we're looking at the plans? That's one of the things I hate about GPS. My phone is not, most maps, north is the top of the map, but not necessarily with your phone. So sometimes I make mistakes based on that. and so then you're going to have the overall plans. Okay, so this is looking at just the plumbing and the basic plumbing. Let me go back over here, and I hope that didn't make you dizzy. Move my coffee out of the way. I think let's go out a little. And this is some sprinkler plans and talking about the control valves. So this is all general, the overall. And then again, we've got these details. So now we go up here, and we got the details about the hangers, how the plumbing is hung from the ceiling. We've got details about how the hangers have to be screwed into the concrete. We've got more details over here about earthquake bracing, and here, earthquake bracing. And remember, I pointed out to you the boilerplate before, but here's another big boilerplate of the LA County notes as pertains to, these are sprinkler plans, so there's more here. And they're also going to oftentimes have specs. Now, I don't have some specs here, but a lot of times there'll be an additional set of paperwork. Here's some piping notes and for an FDC. But when we get specs, it's even more detailed than notes. A lot of times with the specs, it's exactly what kind of screw is going to be used, what type of plumbing, what grade is it, all of these kind of things. So that's where all of this comes together. All of it is checked by someone in fire prevention. And as we talked about before, depending on the size of the fire department, it might be a fire inspector who also does plans check and does inspecting, or most bigger fire departments have engineers that all they do is plans check, and then they have inspectors and all they do is inspect. So they take the plans once they're approved. Now, I told you I was going to show you that one other kind of stamp. This kind of a stamp here, that was just a stamp as to the date it was turned in. So again, the clock starts when they turn them in. So let's go back to the end game. When all of that is done, then they get approved. Once they get approved, they take these plans over to the building official. Once all of the plans are turned back in and have been reviewed, then they approve the overall. Once they get that approval, they can start construction, but they will be continuously inspected throughout the process, and they'll be told, they get notes on here when they have to call and say, send the inspector over, we're ready for our underground check, we're ready for our pressure test, whatever it might be. Okay, that's it, guys. I'm going to switch back here and say goodbye. I tried to keep this short, but there are a lot of things having to do with plans process. Okay, see you guys.